So good evening and warm greetings to everyone. I'm Dr. Devina Krishna, Assistant Professor of Linguistics at Patna Women's College, India. And as we have gathered today on March 27th, that marks the International Day of Multilingualism, celebrating the ability to speak more languages than one's own native language. The day aims to promote learning various languages because humans have evolved over thousands of years to adopt and speak more than one language easily. Let me just show the outline of my presentation. So these are the elements of my presentation. This is how my talk has been planned. So it will talk about the concepts, the main concepts which I mentioned in my presentation, such as bilingualism, multilingualism, and so on. It will also talk about this whole idea of translanguaging and how translanguaging takes place in the Indian context with conclusion. Now, before I actually begin my presentation, I would just like to introduce you all to the notion of monolingualism and bilingualism. Now, we know that when we talk about monolingualism, it is actually the ability to use only one language. And on the other hand, when we talk about bilingualism, so there we actually use more than one language. It is actually two languages. Okay. So what happens is, like, when we talk about language, let me also give you, the whole idea of language, how language is linked to culture, language and culture. These are the terms which are intertwined, and it is the way by which people communicate with one another. Languages are definitely a means to communicate with one another, build relationships, and create a sense of community. So we are just, as human beings, we are just not surrounded by one language. We are surrounded by multiple languages. And this leads me to, talk about these issues of monolingualism, bilingualism, and multilingualism. So, of course, monolingualism is the ability to use one language, but then we have, on the other hand, bilingualism, where we can use more than one language and we use dual languages, let's say. Now, when we talk about bilingualism, of course, it turns out to be a valuable asset. And I mentioned in my slide, the ability to speak in more than one language is a valuable asset. So, of course, it's a valuable asset. And when we talk about bilingualism in the classroom, now what happens when there is bilingualism in the classroom? It allows us to gain proficiency in speaking more than one language. Now, according to me, bilingual classrooms, they are the need of the hour. Why? Because we need the comprehensive development of children from a very early age. So it is very important that they are being taught, in the regional language to improve conceptual understanding and establish a better connection between school and home learning. So it is important that right from the beginning, the children are being exposed to a bilingual atmosphere. So it serves as a common human condition that makes it possible for an individual to function at some level in more than one language. And it also helps to stay aligned with our cultural identity. Of course, it brings value to our social interactions, and the benefits include academic advantage, self-confidence, and increased self-esteem. And it also helps students effectively connect with people of different cultures and backgrounds. So these are, we can say, the benefits of being surrounded in a bilingual environment. Let me also, again, elaborate this whole idea of bilingual education. So what happens if a person is receiving bilingual education? So teaching of academic content takes place in two languages. One is a native language and the other is a second language. The students, they study school subjects through an additional language and a few others through their first language or two languages. In India, it provides an easy way of learning. Primary instruction through the regional language and English takes place. So let me also talk about, this whole idea of bilingual. When we say bilingual education, how it actually makes, the learners, they are, getting exposure in two different languages. And of course, it serves as a concept that involves teaching academic content in two languages in a native tongue, and along with that, the secondary, with varying amounts of each language used in accordance. Now, I've also mentioned, apart from these benefits, I've also mentioned the goals of bilingual education. So these include teaching English to every student, especially we are here in my presentation. I have taken English as a second language. Then it fosters academic achievement, enabling English speakers to learn a second language, developing national language resources. So with bilingualism comes another connection, that is multilingualism. So multilingualism is an ability of an individual speaker or community to communicate in 3 or more languages. So naturally, when we talk about our country, India, so multilingualism plays a lot of role. It has played a key role, especially in our country. There are people, it's a diverse country, and we say that the Indian subcontinent is a linguist paradise because there are so many languages and so many people from different regions, and they're all grouped together in various cultural and religious groups. So, India is culturally, ethnically, and religiously diverse. And of course, language serves as one medium through which people maintain group identities. So we have a lot of states in India, a lot of union territories, and we can say that each state has at least one official language, and many have two also in addition to English. And other than that, other than these unique languages, there are scripts attributed to each state. So India often seems like a collection of distinct, you can say distinct regions due to the cultural and linguistic differences between states. And so there's vast diversity in languages, and it's the beauty of the nation. Of course, this whole idea of multilingualism contrasts with monolingualism, where we can just use one language. And of course, multilingualism is an integral part of our society and culture. And here we have the ability to speak more than one language. It's unique and it's layered. And interestingly, there are multiple varieties of the same language. So one language can give rise to multiple varieties. And if there is variation in the language, that is something which is very important for linguists and language enthusiasts to find out. Within this whole scenario of multilingualism, there is this whole idea of code mixing and code switching. So when we are practicing, when we are actually engaged in linguistic practices within this whole domain of multilingualism, we as language speakers engage ourselves in these linguistic practices of code mixing and code switching. So how we already know that these are sociolinguistic practices. Code mixing takes place at intrasentential level, and code switching takes place at intersentential levels. So that is another unique feature, and that has given rise to uh, to formation of so many different linguistic codes also. Of course, this impacts education also, this whole notion of multilingualism. And this also serves a lot of benefits. It helps children develop superior reading and writing skills. And once children develop those, they also have better analytical, social, and academic skills than unilingual peers. So again, these are some of the advantages of multilingualism. So there's access to multiple languages and cultures. Then there's a larger language sensitivity. It is said that, researchers have shown that polyglots function better. So this is we can say the cognitive function is much better. Then learning a language at an early age makes it easier. So it's good that if you want to learn a language, you should start at a very early age. So that makes the entire job easy for you. Then it also boosts cognitive functions. So as I said that polyglots function better. So it has its own advantage. Learning different languages lead to various advantages. And of course, it expands your mind and worldview. So your sense of perception is also broadened if you get exposure to so many languages. So it's good to be multilingual. And as we celebrate today, the International Day of Multilingualism, we actually carry this whole idea forward that being multilingual is perfectly normal. Now, let me come to the other, to the other concept, that is translanguaging. Now, I don't know, this might be, sounding something novel for many of us, or maybe some of us have this idea. So I would just like to, elaborate this whole notion of translanguaging. Now, there are three ways through which I can, define translanguaging. I haven't mentioned yet, but I'll just talk about that. So, well, being a linguist, if I'm a linguist, of course, I would like to give as a linguist, I would like to give a linguistic definition. And that says that it is the integrated use of all the languages an individual speaks in a single linguistic system that may involve the mixing of grammatical, morphological, or lexical features from more than one language or dialect. So this is the linguistic definition. Then, according to sociology, it is said that translanguaging is the act performed by bilinguals of assessing different linguistic features or various modes of what are described as autonomous languages in order to maximize communicative potential. Of course, this is a very famous definition given by Ophelia Garcia in 2009, and people often quote that. And then we have another definition from the field of education, which says that it is the practice of encouraging the seamless use of all languages spoken by the students and teacher rather than enforcing separation between the home languages of students and the language of instruction. So in a way, if we analyze these definitions, we will see that, of course, translanguaging, it is also called a framework, or it's a pedagogical approach, or whatever you say it may be, in some act performed by speakers of a language. Okay, so what exactly is happening? Now here on the slide, you can see it is mentioned that it is the act performed by bilinguals of assessing different linguistic features or various modes of what are described as autonomous languages in order to maximize communicative potential. And again, this is an approach to bilingualism, and this goes beyond code switching. So in code switching, you are just switching, from one language to another. But when we talk about this whole idea of translanguaging, this is beyond code switching. There's a hybrid language use, and it's important for bilinguals in multilingual contexts. So, let us, let me give you some examples of translanguaging in practice. When students are working in groups, for example, and I have also done some research. I did some research and found out from students studying in schools. As a part of the research, I found that, of course, the students, when they were working in groups, they actually used their first language, or let me say the native language, and sometimes English. But on the other hand, when they reported back to the teacher, they used English to summarize their discussion. So there was a lot of translanguaging taking place. Then, other than that, sometimes it is also even, I was going through some researches. So I also found through some important researches that the teachers also provide a list of key terms with their translations in the student's first language. So that is another example of translanguaging taking place. So, uh, so even when we check the categories of translanguaging, we'll see that there are two categories. So one is impromptu and the other is planned. Now, in impromptu translanguaging, we'll find that it is spontaneous. It is a spontaneous act. So what happens here? The teacher switches between the native language and English in a natural conversational manner. So it's very spontaneous. It's very natural. So that is why it is called impromptu. But on the other hand, we have another category that is planned translanguaging, where the teacher makes conscious decisions about the learning outcomes, keeping the multilingual diversity of the students in mind. So this is planned. This is planned in advance. For example, the teacher may make use of the flashcards with words written in multiple languages, and he or she may translate instructions between mother tongue and English, and provide resources such as stories in different languages from different cultures. So this is a kind of planned translanguaging that is taking place in classrooms. So we'll find that these practices are taking place. So even in Indian context, I could found from the research that, of course, translanguaging is taking place to some extent, but yes, it is there. Now, if we do a very detailed study, we will find more details about this whole scenario. And of course, this is of course time consuming also. It is said that this whole idea of translanguaging is time consuming, but then it is somewhere or the other engage students. This whole practice engage students, and the students are able to explain their idea very well. So this whole act has some of its benefits as well as some disadvantages, of course. Now, again, this whole idea of this practice in the Indian context. So this is a study by Anderson and Lightfoot in 2021, and that shows that there is occasional use of other languages in English language classrooms. So this was a study that was conducted, and this also showed that there is use of other languages beyond English also. Then minority of teachers reported actively facilitating translanguaging during language practice activities. So again, this was there. Then experienced teachers reported more L1 inclusive practices. So this I had already mentioned how in the Indian context I could found how teachers, they were actually involved in L1 inclusive practices. So for example, as I said that the teacher provided a list of key terms with their translations in the student's first language. So there's a need to focus on use of other languages in English language teacher education in India. So of course, we cannot, we cannot overlook or ignore this whole act of translanguaging. But yes, there's this whole idea to focus on the use of other languages in English language teacher education in India. So of course, this whole act has a lot of benefits, like it promotes a deeper understanding of subject matter by discussing in one language and writing in another. So this is often the Indian scenario. If you see that students they discuss with their classmates in their native language or in the first language, and they are writing the entire thing in another language that is supposedly the second language, that is English. Then this act helps multilingual learners comprehend and communicate about subject area content. So it's a way to comprehend and communicate about subject area content. Then it empowers and promotes the growth of students' language development. So it's one way, it's actually benefiting the students in developing their linguistic skills. Then it is motivating students to speak and partly help them overcome the psychological problems they face with their low linguistic abilities. So how it happens? So there are students who have low linguistic abilities. So in a way, when they are when translanguaging is taking place, they get exposure to other languages also. So it's easy for them to communicate about anything they wish to communicate. So that serves as a motivation for the students to speak. Now, before I actually jump to the conclusion, so we can say that, of course, this whole idea of translanguaging has a lot of advantages. For example, it is engaging students, and students they are free to state ideas using their first language. So in a way, it is improving students' skill, and students can explain their idea in their first language. And it definitely helps students comprehend and communicate the subject area content. But then there are certain disadvantages, of course, like people say that this whole act is time consuming, and in a way students they get less uh, you know exposure as far as the English skills are concerned. So students English skills in some way or the other, so that is getting less exposure. Then students have less effort to express their viewpoint in English, since they can use L1. Then it serves, in some way or the other, students are dependent on the use of first language. But I feel that if there is some amount of balance, then it is just all right. So uh, instead of just focusing on the disadvantages, we can look at the advantages, because it has a lot of advantages. And it's there's this whole it actually this whole act values language diversity among students. So it's very natural. This whole act is very natural, and it can also help uh, the the language learners, or let's say students within classrooms, for example. That can help, this whole act can help them to reduce anxiety and stress also. Because in a way, students, as I said, that it serves as a motivation, and this enables students to use their full linguistic system to communicate. This is the main idea, the idea to use the entire linguistic system. This is what translanguaging is about. And as I said, that it is particularly well suited in the Indian context, where there are multiple languages, and uh, there's a lot of uh, it's a practice that is used in Indian classrooms to some extent. Of course, it is used to some extent, but then we cannot say that that is not being used. There is some amount of translanguaging that is taking play place. So India is a multilingual country, and there's a lot of there's pluralism, there's heterogeneity, and there's this whole um, there are so many raw mother tongues, and there are scheduled languages. So of course, there is a need for multilingual education. There's a lot of need for multilingual education, and you know um, Other than that, we also, there are endangered languages, there are marginalized, impoverished, and let me say socially excluded ones. So we that's what the status of some of the languages are. So keeping all those factors in mind, there is a need to keep this whole notion to keep the languages alive. And if we use this whole act of translanguaging, using within the Indian classrooms to some extent, that is very positive. Um, so this act lies in its ability to transcend communication barriers, and it places importance on both the native language and the new language. Then it says it has proven to be an effective pedagogical practice in a variety of educational contexts where the school language or the language of instruction is different from the languages of the learners. Despite this, most teachers are still discouraged from using bilingualism in classrooms. So this is a real situation, example from the real situation. But I could collect data from the research that uh, teachers, they're still discouraged from using bilingualism in classrooms, or we have this whole idea of speaking one language that is a target language, or let's say English. So the reason is that many teachers are not trained to employ translanguaging in an effective manner. So I think there should be some sort of training also to carry this whole pedagogical practice of translanguaging in an effective manner. Because the way you carry things also matter, the way you present, as a teacher in a classroom, you're a role model. So if you're being trained how to employ this whole idea of translanguaging, that also, uh, that also, I think that's a point that needs attention. So, of course, the last point is that India needs a model of education that reflects diversity. So when we talk about diversity, because as a multilingual country, India's diversity has proven to be a strength. So as a multilingual nation, it should, the model of education should reflect diversity. And English and languages like Hindi are deemed necessary for interaction in national and international communities beyond state and national borders. And there are so many mother tongues or regional languages which are also made relevant through local state governments, institutions, and cultural identity. So in this way, we can say that there is this whole idea of cultivation and practices of multilingualism India, and that has lend itself to more than just not just a preservation of unique or regional identities, but it has also it has great impact on how Indians interact with fellow Indians and around the world. So multilingualism in India defines the nation within global and national networks and communities for business, education, media, and so on. So language plays a lot of important role in our daily interactions. And multilingualism, of course, other than bilingualism, multilingualism, and this whole idea of translanguaging, associated with these concepts, and of course, linguistic diversity in India have shaped the country and unique cultural practices within it. So with that, I just stop my presentation, and thank you so much for listening to my presentation.